The old commander stood alone on the bridge of humanity's last warship. His white hair caught the red glow of warning lights, and his weathered hands rested calmly on the control panel. Through the massive window ahead of him, 10,000 alien ships filled the space around Earth, their weapons ready to fire. "You have 10 minutes to surrender," the alien commander's voice boomed through the speakers. "Your civilization is finished. Look around you, human. Your fleet is destroyed. Your cities burn. Your leaders are dead. One ship cannot stand against our armada." The commander's wrinkled face broke into a slight smile. He looked down at the old-fashioned watch on his wrist, the same watch his father had worn in Vietnam. The alien leader was right about one thing: Earth's modern fleet lay in ruins. The aliens' advanced technology had made quick work of humanity's newest ships. But this wasn't humanity's newest ship. This was the USS Determination, a ghost from the past that had been hiding in plain sight. While the aliens destroyed Earth's modern fleet, they hadn't noticed this single, outdated vessel powered up in orbit around the moon. "I've lived through 3 wars," the commander spoke softly into the radio. "And you know what I learned? Sometimes the old dogs know the best tricks." His fingers moved across the control panel, entering codes into systems that hadn't seen use in decades. The alien commander's laugh echoed through the bridge. "Your primitive weapons cannot harm our shields. Your civilization's time is over. What can one old human in an obsolete ship possibly do?" The commander's smile grew wider. "I'll handle it." Those 3 words sent an unexpected chill through the alien fleet. In their 1,000 years of conquest, they had heard many last words from dying civilizations. They had heard pleading, bargaining, threats, and curses. But they had never heard such simple, calm confidence in the face of certain doom. The commander's fingers finished typing. Around the Determination, hidden silos on the moon's surface began to open. The alien scanners, designed to detect advanced energy weapons, didn't register the hundreds of mechanical devices slowly pointing toward their fleet. "You know," the commander said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "sometimes the old ways work best." The alien ship sensors finally caught movement from the moon's surface, but by then, it was too late. They had been so focused on scanning for energy weapons that they had missed something far more primitive, and far more deadly. The commander looked at his father's watch one last time and whispered, "Let's show them how we handled things in the old days." 6 months earlier, the world changed forever on a quiet Tuesday morning. The first sign came from the old radio telescope in New Mexico. Bob Henderson, who had spent 40 years listening to the stars, was about to retire that week. He was training his replacement when every instrument in the facility suddenly went crazy. "In all my years," Bob muttered, adjusting his glasses, "I've never seen anything like this." His hands, steady from decades of experience, moved across the familiar controls. The signals were coming from near Mars, and they were strong, too strong to be natural. Within hours, every telescope on Earth turned toward Mars. That's when they saw them, massive ships, each one bigger than the largest city on Earth, appearing out of nowhere. The ships moved with impossible grace, their dark metal surfaces reflecting the sun's light. World leaders gathered for an emergency meeting. Military satellites tracked the ships as they moved closer to Earth. News channels worldwide showed the same images over and over, while people gathered in streets, churches, and homes, waiting to learn if they were alone in the universe. The answer came 3 days later. The alien ships stopped just beyond the moon. Their message, broadcast on every radio and TV frequency, was clear and cold: "Humanity, your civilization has been deemed too primitive for inclusion in the Galactic Federation. You have 48 hours to surrender control of your planet. Resistance will result in extinction." In the Pentagon's underground war room, generals and politicians argued about what to do. Their newest weapons, they claimed, could fight the aliens. But sitting quietly in the corner, retired General Thomas watched the alien ships on the screens. He noticed something everyone else had missed: the ships were arranged in perfect, predictable patterns. Too perfect, he whispered to himself. In Vietnam, he'd learned that perfect formations were a weakness. The enemy could predict where you'd be. He looked at the ultra-modern weapons the younger generals were proposing to use, all connected to satellites and computers. In his gut, he knew they wouldn't work. Thomas picked up his old flip phone, the kind that couldn't be traced or hacked, and made a call. "John? Remember that underground base we mothballed in '89? The one with all the old equipment?" He paused, looking at the alien ships on the screen. "I think it's time we got the old team back together." As the world's governments prepared their modern armies, a different kind of preparation was happening quietly around the globe. In retirement homes and small houses, phones began to ring. Men and women who hadn't worn uniforms in decades checked their mail to find coded messages they thought they'd never see again. The aliens had given humanity 48 hours, thinking Earth would either surrender or try to fight with its modern weapons. They never expected that humanity's best chance would come from its oldest warriors, using technology so old it was new again. The underground bunker in Colorado hadn't seen visitors in 30 years. As the heavy steel doors creaked open, dust fell from the ceiling. General Thomas led the way down, his flashlight beam showing cobwebs and old warning signs on the walls. Behind him walked 12 people, all in their 60s and 70s, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. "Home sweet home," said Richard, a former spacecraft engineer who had designed ships during the Cold War. He ran his hand along an old control panel, wiping away decades of dust. "They wanted to scrap all this. Called it obsolete." He chuckled, his eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. "Guess being obsolete might just save the world." The group spread out through the facility. Most of them hadn't seen each other since retirement, but they fell back into their old roles like no time had passed. Anne, who had been the best radar operator in the Navy, started checking the old tracking systems. Bill, who could fix anything mechanical, began inspecting the machinery they'd need. "Remember what they taught us in training?" Thomas asked, watching his old friend's work. "Keep it simple. The more complicated something is, the more ways it can fail." He pointed to the modern tablet a younger officer had brought down. "Those aliens can probably shut down anything with a computer chip newer than 1990. But these?" He patted an old analog control panel. "They won't know what hit them." In the deepest part of the bunker, they found what they'd come for. 3 massive hangar bays housed spacecraft that looked like they belonged in an old science fiction movie. They were built in secret during the Cold War, designed to fight in space using technology so basic it was practically bulletproof. "They're not pretty," Richard said, looking up at the nearest ship. "No fancy shields, no energy weapons, no computer guidance systems. Just good old American engineering, built to take a beating and keep on fighting." He pulled out his old toolkit, the same one he'd used 40 years ago. "Give me a week with these, and I'll have them ready to fly." As they worked, more veterans arrived. Retired pilots who had flown everything from prop planes to space shuttles. Engineers who had built the first satellites. Scientists who understood radiation and space warfare before computers did all the thinking for them. They worked through the night, their aged hands remembering skills that had laid dormant for decades. In the corner, Thomas watched a small TV showing the aliens' ships hanging above Earth. The modern military was already trying to fight back, using their newest weapons. Just as he'd feared, nothing was working. "You know what our advantage is?" Anne said, looking up from an old radar screen that had just flickered to life. "They think they know everything about us from our modern technology. But they don't know about any of this. They don't know about us." She smiled, her wrinkled face determined. Sometimes the best tricks are the ones that were written out of the history books. As the facility hummed back to life, Thomas looked at his team, not as they were now, with their gray hair and weathered faces, but as the young warriors they'd once been. And in many ways, still were. The aliens thought Earth's older generation was irrelevant. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The aliens noticed something was wrong 3 days after their ultimatum expired. Their energy weapons had easily destroyed Earth's modern military satellites and defenses, but now their scanners were picking up strange signals they couldn't explain. Deep underground, in similar bunkers around the world, the old guard was waking up. "Look at this," Richard said, pointing to a radar screen in the Colorado bunker. The aliens' ships were moving in their usual perfect formations, like a chessboard in space. They're so predictable. Everything they do follows computer logic. He turned to Thomas with a grin. They fight like machines, not soldiers. And had made an even more important discovery. Their scanners use advanced quantum technology, she explained, her fingers tracing patterns on the old radar display. They're so advanced, they completely miss our older systems. It's like having $1 million security system that can't spot someone using a bobby pin to pick a lock. In the hangar bay, the first of the old spacecraft was ready. It looked rough compared to modern ships, all angles and thick metal, built to last rather than look pretty. Bill had replaced its modern components with parts so old they could have been in a museum. "No fancy computer guidance," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "Just basic mechanical controls and good old human judgment. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one." The team got their first real test when an alien patrol ship passed near the moon. They watched on their old radar as the alien vessel swept the area with its advanced scanners, looking for any sign of human activity. The patrol passed right over one of their hidden ships and didn't detect a thing. "We're invisible to them," Thomas realized, his eyes lighting up. "They're looking for energy signatures from modern technology. They can't see our old equipment any more than a modern metal detector can find a wooden sword." Word spread through the secret network of bunkers. Around the world, other teams of veterans were bringing similar old technology back to life. In Australia, they were reactivating long-abandoned tracking stations. In Russia, retired submarine commanders were adapting their experience to old spacecraft designed for stealth. In Britain, former Royal Air Force pilots were learning to fly ships that handled like the propeller planes of their youth. The aliens remained confident in their superiority, broadcasting messages about humanity's primitive technology and inevitable defeat. But they didn't notice the small changes happening on their scanners. They didn't realize that the strange, irregular signals they dismissed as background noise were actually communications between Earth's hidden bases. "You know what this reminds me of?" Richard asked one evening, as they watched the alien ships through a telescope that had been cutting edge in 1975. "Remember those war games in '82? When we beat the new computerized defense system using nothing but radio Morse code and paper maps?" Thomas nodded, remembering. Back then, they'd learned that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Now, they were about to teach that lesson to the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They think technology always moves forward, and said, monitoring signals from other bases around the world. They never considered that sometimes you have to take a step backward to move forward. Their weakness is thinking we're primitive. Their mistake is not realizing that primitive doesn't mean powerless. The first test of Earth's old technology came sooner than expected. An alien supply ship broke formation, moving closer to Earth than usual. In the Colorado bunker, Thomas saw an opportunity. "Time to see if all our crazy ideas work," he said, looking at his team. They had spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment. Richard's retrofitted spacecraft, stripped of all modern technology, waited in its launch bay. The pilot, a retired Air Force veteran named Charlie, sat in the cockpit, running through pre-flight checks using paper checklists and analog gauges. Remember, and said into an old radio handset, their ships are completely automated. They don't expect anyone to fly manually anymore. She looked at her radar screen, tracking the alien vessel's predictable movement pattern. They're like a computer chess program, very powerful, but they can only think in straight lines. Charlie's voice crackled over the radio, "Ready when you are." His spacecraft looked like something from an old NASA mission, all bulky metal and simple design. But underneath its basic exterior lay humanity's greatest hope, weapons and systems so old they were invisible to alien technology. Thomas took a deep breath and gave the order, "Launch." The old ship lifted off silently, its simple rocket engines leaving no energy signature that alien scanners could detect. Charlie flew manually, using skills he'd learned 40 years ago. No computers, no autopilot, just human hands on the controls. "This feels like my old crop duster," Charlie radioed back, a smile in his voice. More space between the clouds, though. They watched as Charlie's ship approached the alien vessel. The massive supply ship, its crew relying entirely on automated systems, didn't notice the small, primitive craft drawing near. Charlie positioned his ship in the alien vessel's blind spot, just like he used to hide from radar during training exercises decades ago. "Now comes the interesting part," Richard said, watching through a telescope. They had modified an old satellite recovery system, the kind used to grab space debris in the 1980s. Charlie would have one chance to attach it to the alien ship. Charlie's voice remained calm as he moved into position. "Just like catching a runaway steer," he said, his years of ranch work before joining the Air Force coming in handy. The mechanical arm extended, latching onto the alien ship's hull. The effect was immediate. The alien vessel's automated systems, designed to detect energy weapons and modern threats, had no protocol for dealing with simple mechanical devices. Alarms blared in the alien ship as Charlie's mechanical arm interfered with its navigation systems. "Would you look at that," Bill said, grinning. "Their fancy shields don't stop good old-fashioned metal and cables." The alien supply ship's automated systems tried to compensate, but without success. Its engines fought against the mechanical grip, burning through fuel and damaging its own systems. Within minutes, the mighty vessel was spinning helplessly, its computer brain unable to comprehend or counter such a primitive attack. "Charlie, get out of there," Thomas ordered. They had proven their point. The old spacecraft detached and slipped away, leaving the alien ship to limp back to its fleet. In the bunker, the team watched the alien vessels retreat on their radar. "They won't know what hit them," and said. "Their sensors can't even tell them what happened." To them, their ship just started malfunctioning for no reason. Thomas nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Now we know their weakness. They've forgotten the basics of warfare in their rush for advanced technology. They don't expect anyone to fight without computers and energy weapons." Richard looked at the star chart on the wall, marked with the positions of the alien fleet. "They think they're invincible because they've never faced anyone who fights like us. They've forgotten that sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones." The team began planning their next move. Around the world, other bunkers reported similar successes with their own tests. Humanity had found its edge, not in advancing technology, but in remembering the lessons of the past. News of the successful attack spread through the hidden network of bunkers. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, a different kind of preparation was underway. 3 old nuclear submarines, restored by their former crews, quietly lifted from their secret underwater bases. "Just like the old days," whispered Captain Wilson, his wrinkled hand running along the periscope of his submarine, now modified for space travel. The sub's nuclear engines had been sealed and reinforced for space, but otherwise, it operated exactly as it had during the Cold War. Silent running, no electronics. "They'll never see us coming." In the Colorado bunker, Thomas coordinated with other bases worldwide. Ann's radar showed the alien fleet spreading out, still searching for the source of the attack on their supply ship. Their perfect formations had become more cautious, but they still moved in predictable patterns. "Look at them," Richard said, pointing to the radar. "They're like a computer program trying to solve a puzzle. They keep searching the same areas over and over, expecting different results." He shook his head. "They don't understand human unpredictability." The submarines, now converted to space-worthy vessels, moved silently through space. Their crews, all veterans of underwater warfare, found space combat surprisingly familiar. They used the same techniques they'd perfected decades ago, staying in shadows, using natural cover, moving when the enemy wasn't looking. "Target in sight," Captain Wilson radioed, his voice barely above a whisper despite being in space. Old habits died hard. His submarine-turned spaceship floated behind an asteroid, watching an alien patrol vessel. "Permission to engage?" Thomas gave the order. The submarine crews had trained for this moment, practicing their old torpedo techniques modified for space warfare. The torpedoes weren't the modern smart missiles the aliens expected, they were simple rockets guided by wire, controlled by human hands. The first strike caught the alien ship completely by surprise. Their automated defenses, designed to spot energy weapons and missiles, didn't register the simple rocket-powered torpedoes until impact. The alien vessel's shields, calibrated for energy attacks, couldn't stop old-fashioned explosive warheads. "Direct hit," Wilson reported calmly. Moving to secondary target. Around the Earth, more submarines joined the attack. They struck from different angles, using tactics perfected during decades of Cold War cat-and-mouse games. The alien fleet, for the first time in their history of conquest, found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't track or predict. "They're starting to panic," and observed, watching the alien ships break their careful formations. "Their computers can't find a pattern in our attacks because there isn't one. We're fighting on instinct and experience." In space, the converted submarines continued their silent war. They attacked and vanished, leaving the aliens firing blindly at empty space. The massive alien ships, with all their advanced technology, were being hunted by vessels their sensors couldn't even detect. "You know what this reminds me of?" Richard asked, watching another successful strike on the radar. "Those stories about wooden ships defeating iron ones. Sometimes the old ways work best." He turned to Thomas with a grin. "Bet those aliens never studied Earth's naval history." The alien fleet's perfect order had dissolved into chaos. Their automated systems, programmed for modern warfare, couldn't adapt to humanity's primitive but effective tactics. Every scan they ran, every analysis they performed, failed to detect the simple vessels striking from the darkness of space. In the Colorado bunker, Thomas watched the alien fleet's confusion with grim satisfaction. "They thought they were invincible because they'd never lost a battle," he said. "But they've never fought humans before. And they've certainly never fought old soldiers with nothing left to lose." The alien commander stood in his control room, watching another ship disappear from his fleet's status display. For the first time in his 1,000-year career, he felt something unfamiliar: doubt. His perfect record of planetary conquests was crumbling before a species that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. Meanwhile, in orbit around Jupiter, Charlie flew his old spacecraft between the gas giant's moons, leading 3 alien pursuit ships on a wild chase. Just like flying through canyon country, he radioed back to Earth, using a frequency so old it might as well have been Morse code. "They only think in straight lines, but I learned to fly in the mountains." The alien ships, their advanced AI plotting the most efficient course, couldn't match Charlie's unpredictable flying. Their computers calculated perfect trajectories while Charlie relied on gut instinct and 50 years of flight experience. One by one, the alien ships crashed into moon rocks or got caught in gravity wells their computers hadn't accounted for. Back in the Colorado bunker, Thomas received reports from around the solar system. The submarine fleet had destroyed 20 alien ships. The Australian team had disabled their communication relays using modified weather balloons. The British had scattered old space mines, simple metal boxes filled with explosives, through the aliens' patrol routes. Their entire battle strategy depends on technology, and said, studying radar patterns. Without their computers telling them what to do, they're lost. She pointed to a group of alien ships moving in circles, trapped in a field of simple radio interference that confused their navigation systems. Richard walked in carrying a printout, an actual piece of paper, something the aliens never used. We intercepted some of their communications, he said, his face serious. They're calling for reinforcements. But here's the interesting part, they're scared. They've never faced an enemy they couldn't predict. The alien commander's voice boomed through Earth's radio channels again, but this time it lacked its former confidence. Your primitive attacks cannot defeat us. We have conquered 1,000 worlds. We will not be stopped by obsolete technology and elderly humans. Thomas smiled at the message. Listen to that, he said. They're trying to convince themselves more than us. He turned to his team. Time for the next phase. Let's show them what else we kept from the old days. Around the Earth, hidden silos began to open. While the aliens had destroyed all of modern military bases in their first strike, they'd missed the abandoned facilities from decades past. Sites that appeared empty on their scans now revealed rows of nuclear missiles, not the modern kind with smart guidance systems, but the simple, mechanical ones from years ago. Basic rocket science, Richard said, checking the launch calculations with a pencil and paper. Aim, fire, and let gravity do the rest. The first wave of missiles caught the alien fleet completely by surprise. Their defense systems, designed to track and destroy energy weapons, couldn't cope with the simple ballistic trajectories of old nuclear rockets. Ships began vanishing from their formation, either destroyed or fleeing in panic. In orbit, Charlie watched the chaos from his hiding spot behind a satellite. Would you look at that, he radioed. All their fancy technology, and they never planned for plain old rockets. The alien commander's next transmission sounded frantic. This is impossible. Your civilization is primitive. Your weapons are obsolete. Your warriors are past their prime. How are you defeating us? And switched off the alien transmission. They still don't get it, she said. They think newer always means better. They forgot that experience and wisdom come with age, and sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Thomas looked at his team, the retired soldiers, engineers, and pilots who had returned to duty one last time. The aliens had dismissed them as too old, their technology as too primitive. That mistake was about to cost them their first defeat in 1,000 years. In the alien fleet's command ship, their leaders held an emergency council. For the first time in their history, they faced defeat. Their advanced AI systems had analyzed every human attack but could find no pattern, no logic to predict what these primitive beings would do next. How are they doing this? The alien commander demanded, watching another ship disappear from their displays. They're using technology from their own Stone Age. Their warriors are at the end of their natural lifespans. It makes no sense. Back on Earth, Thomas and his team were preparing their final strike. The converted submarines had positioned themselves around the alien fleet. Charlie and other pilots had their old ships hidden behind debris and dead satellites. The missile silos were reloaded with their last rockets. You know why we're winning? Richard asked, making final adjustments to their equipment. It's because they don't understand what experience means. They think wisdom can be downloaded like a computer program. And nodded, monitoring the radar. They replaced their pilots with AI because it was more efficient. They automated their weapons because computers were faster. They forgot that some things can't be programmed, like intuition or gut feeling. In space, Captain Wilson's submarine crew demonstrated this truth. When an alien ship passed nearby, Wilson didn't need a computer to tell him when to fire. He knew from decades of experience, from countless hours in submarine warfare, exactly when to strike. His torpedo hit the alien vessel's weakest point, something no scan had revealed but that his years of combat experience had helped him spot. Their ships are like their minds, Charlie radioed as he flew between asteroid fields. All fancy on the outside, but simple once you understand them. They do everything the same way, over and over. He chuckled. They never learn that the most dangerous enemy is the one you can't predict. The alien commander received reports from his fleet. Half their ships were damaged or destroyed. Their advanced shields couldn't stop the primitive nuclear weapons. Their sensors couldn't track the old submarines. Their AI couldn't predict where the next attack would come from. We have analyzed their attack patterns 10,000 times, the aliens' tactical AI reported. There is no logic. No pattern. They are not following any known military doctrine. Because we're not following a doctrine, Thomas said, overhearing the intercepted transmission. We're following our instincts. Every person in this fight is using what they learned over a lifetime of service. That's something no computer can copy. In the bunker, Richard showed Thomas a message from other resistance cells around the world. More veterans had joined the fight, bringing with them old equipment and weapons the aliens couldn't detect. Former tank commanders had modified their vehicles for space warfare. Retired engineers had turned Cold War satellites into weapons. "Look at this," Anne said suddenly, pointing to her radar screen. The alien fleet was gathering in one place, their formation tight and defensive. They're scared. Really scared. All their technology, and they're backing away from a bunch of old soldiers with outdated weapons. Thomas watched the alien ships cluster together. He thought about all the battles he'd seen, all the wars he'd fought. The aliens had never lost because they'd never faced an enemy who fought like humans, with creativity, with desperation, with the wisdom that only comes from years of real experience. They thought age was weakness, he said, looking at his team of veterans. They thought old meant useless. They never understood that every gray hair, every wrinkle, every year we've lived has taught us something their computers can never learn. The alien commander's voice came through again, but this time it shook with uncertainty. What are you? How can you defeat our perfect technology with primitive weapons? Richard smiled, his weathered face reflecting decades of engineering experience. We're human, he said, though the aliens couldn't hear him. We learned our lessons the hard way, through years of trial and error. And that's something no amount of advanced technology can replace.